Hello there, my name is Kalumunyikosa Kearns, Head of Corporate Communications at Access Bank Zambia, and welcome to the very first edition of the W Conversations, an extension of the W Initiative, which is Access Bank Zambia's women's banking proposition. So joining us today to discuss a topic around empowered journeys, navigating health, loss, and resilience, we have with us today Auntie Karen Nakawala. I don't know whether to call her Auntie Karen or simply Karen. She's wearing many hats, but today she's joining us as a cancer survivor that set up the Teal Sisters. And we're hoping that through today's conversations, many of us that may have been going through this disease or know a relative or friend that have gone through this journey will be encouraged and also learn from some of the coping mechanisms that she has adopted. We also have with us Dr. Kunda Phiri. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Dr. Kunda Phiri is a public health practitioner and will be speaking to us both as a medical practitioner as well as a woman that has also gone through her own experiences around loss in one form or another. To start our conversations, today's topic is about empowered journeys, navigating health, loss, and resilience. And the reason that we chose this topic is we recognize that a lot of us women are going through different stages of our lives. It might be a medical diagnosis that we were not expecting. It might be the loss of a loved one, a parent, a sibling, in some unfortunate cases, a child. And really, the conversation is focused and centered around how are we coping and how are we getting through these difficult times. So, Karen, I'm going to just go straight into it. Most of us know your story, but for those that don't know, Karen is also the founder of Teal Sisters. Maybe I'll let you speak to Teal Sisters briefly.
Okay, well, thank you. So I started Teal Sisters after going through a cervical cancer diagnosis and treatment. And I don't know why it is, but usually when somebody goes through something traumatic, uh, they sort of become protective of other people. And you want to make sure that people don't get to the point that you got to. So they become advocates. And that's how Teal Sisters was born. So I started Teal Sisters in 2020. And I think I wanted to be the person that I needed when I needed that person, but I couldn't, I didn't have that. So I decided to be that person because I think I knew that somebody was going to need me. I just did not realize how many and how much. Yeah. So it was after my diagnosis, and I decided to share my story because, again, I noticed that there were very few women that I had known. Actually, I hadn't even heard of anyone who had been through cervical cancer. I had heard of breast cancer. I knew so many advocates talking about breast cancer, but I realized, I think after the diagnosis, that there was so much stigma attached to it, and people didn't want to talk about it. But it is the one cancer that is preventable, but the number one killer of women. And so somebody had to do something about it, and it had to be me. Yeah.
Speaking from your, could you share your journey from being, even if it's just a minute? I know it's not possible to close it in a minute, maybe under 2 minutes, but your journey from diagnosis, how are you finding out that you have this cancer? Is it something that you're suspecting? How did you even end up being diagnosed? Or is it just one of those where the usual routine, oh, you need to be screened every 3 years, or is it 2 years and you go there and you're like, oh, Philip, bueno, and then you find this, or did you suspect? Could you just share your journey from their diagnosis to where we are today? Because right now I hear cervical cancer. I hear cervical cancer. Top of mind is Karen got through this, so others can get through it. Because for me, you have become this face that, and not in a bad way, not in a bad way, because you have risen through a very difficult time, and in that difficult time, you have gone into advocacy and making it possible for early detection by other women. Could you just speak to that?
So you've heard of people say I was in a freak accident. I think that's the best way to describe. how I got the diagnosis. I was literally forced by my gynecologist's husband. So they delivered my last child. Okay. And ever since, the only time they'll see me there is when I take Owami for under 5 then. And so after that, I mean, she's now 14. I don't go there. And they'll ask why I don't go to visit them. And I'm like, but why would I visit you in a clinic? What, you know what I mean? I'm not sick. And she says, no, but you need to come and get screened, just to make sure you're okay. And that day I was MC at the official opening of Midland Hospital. And the husband was in the audience. And he just says, today you are coming to the hospital. And I was like, okay, I had a meeting. So I said, okay, let me go for a meeting and then I'll come back. I didn't intend to go. In the meeting, he sends a text, Karen, I made a booking for you. My wife is expecting you at 4:30. And I was like, let me get them off my back. And that is how I went for that screening. And so you can imagine the shock when she started examining me and then she stops midway and she's looking at me like, Doc, what's wrong? And she says, are you okay? I'm like, yeah. Well, I was until you put that thing inside me. She says, because you're bleeding. And I'm thinking, well, you've hurt me. That is why I didn't want to come for this screening. So she says, no, there's a growth on your cervix. And at that point, as usual, I was laughing it off. I thought it was a polyp. I had excuses for everything that happened. And she did a pap smear. 7 days later, it was confirmed that it was cancer. So immediately I went straight to the cancer hospital. And as they say, the rest is history. Yeah. So it was, like I said, it was a freak accident. If I hadn't gone, probably would be talking a different story. I did have, when I look back in hindsight, I did have a few symptoms that I ignored and I thought it was just normal. Sometimes I'd have bleeding in between the periods. And I remember going to my doctor because I was having hot flashes. And he says to me, no, you're just perimenopausal. And so I thought that was menopause setting in. I started having a backache. And I remember being told, oh, these high heels you like, one day you're going to have backache. And I thought it was the high heels. And I carried on with my life, but in hindsight, those were symptoms. And with cervical cancer, once you start getting symptoms, it means that it has already started progressing. And that is why I always say screen before you have any symptoms, because then it's very unlikely that they'll find anything wrong with you. Yeah. So that's how my life got saved. It was a freak accident.
The rest of us now know better and are learning from you. And like you said, you wanted to be, the advocacy came from a space of you wanted to be the person that you needed when you're going through this. And I think this is why these conversations and platforms like these are important. And thank you so much for sharing your story. Dr. Kunda. So from your perspective or in your experience, what are some of the emotional responses women may experience when facing a serious diagnosis or significant loss? And how are these emotions going to impact overall health? I think Karen's is a little bit, I think the reaction I'm getting immediately is shock. You're not even suspecting. I can only imagine your mindset or at what point it sank in. But medically speaking, what are some of the responses that women would or instinctively come out when you're diagnosed with a disease like cancer? And it may not necessarily be cancer, it could be other forms of terminal illness and the like.
Yeah, so I think for us to fully appreciate the emotional response that a woman would have to that situation, we have to first understand the background, who is a typical woman in our setting, let's say in Zambia, right? So we're looking at the role that women are playing in society. Women are usually the primary caregiver in the home. This is the person who's looking after everybody else, looking after the kids and the parents and the husband. Everybody is relying on this woman. So how then does she feel when she's in that situation where she's the one who needs to be taken care of. And then on top of that, we have the stigma that's associated with many diseases that have to do with women's health. Like if we're talking about cervical cancer, things like that. A woman might even not be, so open to talk about it in public. So there's all of those things. And of course, one thing that will be prominent is the effect on mental health. So this is someone who's going to be likely to go into depression, to feel some type of guilt, even. All of those are, some of the things that can happen and how a woman would really feel in that situation. So I think it's very important for us to be context specific as well, because we're not in the Western world. We're in Zambia, and a lot of times there's a lot attached to this. Out there in the community, people will think you probably did this or you did that. It's some type of witchcraft, and there must be something to blame. There's so many things that are going on in the background. And I think as we have these conversations, it's really important for us to be sensitive about that and really, understand how a woman would feel. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Karen, she mentioned the context within which a woman is defined. I guess that would be in an African setting. I think culturally, women are the homemakers. Naturally, you're the caregivers. And then you find yourself in this situation where now you are the caregiver, and who is going to give you that care? Because obviously, a diagnosis like that would then mean you need the emotional support, mental support as well, because there's so much that's going on. So how did your diagnosis change the way you viewed family support during this specific difficult time? I know that you were very close with your mom. May her soul rest in peace. I followed the story of you and your mom when she was alive, and you'd share these pictures and amazing stories of what a wonderful woman she was. And you had lost her a year before the diagnosis. With that happening without mom around, how did you? Because sorry, I'm getting emotional about this. There's something that you said some years after mom died, and you posted on your social media where you said, "Don't tell me not to grieve." And it was very, even now, just thinking around it. So thinking, having gone through that, you were still in that early stage of mourning, and now you're mourning another loss in terms of health, and this pillar of yours is not there. How has that changed how you view family support during a difficult time like that?
Yeah, well, looking back, that was, I think, the most difficult time of my life. And then I think before I could, you know, grasp the fact that she had gone, I now had to deal with something that obviously would have needed her to be there. And I'll tell you, the first thing that I did was I shut off everyone, because I didn't think anybody could give me the kind of care, love, and support that my mom could have given me. So it was just my two little sisters that I was staying with and my partner at the time, who knew what was happening. Like, nobody knew what was happening. I continued working. I was actually getting ready for the last Zambia Fashion Week that we did. And I don't know whether that was just to prove a point to myself, or I don't know what it was, but I would like to believe that had I given people the chance to support me, they probably would have. But then again, when you're dealing with something like cancer, it's very personal. It doesn't matter what kind of cancer it is. Like she said, there's a lot of stigma attached to it, a lot of myths and misconceptions. And the last thing you want is for people to start pointing fingers and talking. And so it was difficult for me to let anyone into my circle. Eventually, I let my friends, of course, my best friend knew, and she would travel. Like, she used to live in Ndola. When I'm going for my sessions, she would literally get on a bus early in the morning so she could go with me to the sessions, radiation sessions. And she was one of the few that knew about it. My children, the younger one was much younger. She was about 9, 10. And the older one was, I think, at a point where she actually understood what I was going through. And fortunately for me, she was actually studying social work. So it was easy for her to understand where mommy was at, you know, how she was feeling, how to handle mommy, and, you know, things like that. And I think that's what got me through. The support that I got from the few people around me is what sort of pushed me through. Because by the time people were coming to learn about it, I was already done with treatment. I think a lot of people read about it in the news because the First Lady invited me to some high-level event. And that's the time I'd posted something on social media and started the Facebook page. So they invited me to go and speak. And I think the support that I got was so overwhelming. I honestly didn't expect it because I'd heard so many horror stories about how women, you know, die, you know, in loneliness. Cancer is a very lonely disease. No matter how much support you get, it's a very lonely disease because most of the time you'll be told to keep away from crowds because your immune system is compromised. It's very low. So they're afraid you'll get an infection, which can knock you out. So yes, you'll have the support around you, but it's actually a very lonely disease, and I really did miss my mom. And talking about the post you spoke about, when mom died, I was her first child, you know, and I was with best buddies, like we were so close. And so you get there, and I remember I drove in, and you know, you see the sea of people crying, and there was a choir singing. And so I walk in there, I'm so emotional. You know how it is. I'm crying from the car. Literally, I was crying. And this woman came to me and says, shh, the pastor is praying. Oh my God, I think that woman has never been slapped like that. Like, yeah. I'm like, who are you to tell me not to grieve? Because he wants to pray. Like right now, wait, you're not even thinking about God. You know what I mean? I just want to be left in this space. I just want to mourn my mom the way I feel I should. And you're telling me to keep quiet because somebody wants to pray. And I remember this, everybody just kept quiet. And we walked into the house. And when everybody saw me, because I was like, mom's, it was copy and paste, and everybody was just busy wailing. And this woman literally came to apologize. And she wasn't the only one. You have these aunties. I was, oh no, you're the oldest. You have to, of course, sir, because of your brothers and sisters, And I did that. I did the strong thing. And everybody, my brothers were coming from out of the country, and when they come, they want to see me and they all break down. But I have to be the one to co-sign and hold everyone. You know what I mean? And then after that, I stayed behind to take care of the affairs. And then I get back home and I realized I hadn't grieved. And I think I went into a depression. I remember I used to live in a house that had no curtains drawn for weeks on end. I made sure the kids went away. The young one was staying with a friend, which was in school. So I was alone at home. I wake up, maybe go take a bath, but the curtains were drawn. I didn't want light. I didn't want anybody. And I realized I had not gone through the process because people did not allow me to go through the process. So I had that time to mourn. And I think that was a very dangerous time for me because I think I became very aggressive. I became not the Karen that I would snap at anything. And I think after that, I realized that grief is a process. It's like swimming. You're swimming against this very, very fast and heavy current. And you have to get to the other side. It's either that or you drown. And so you have to let somebody go through the process, whether they want to scream, they want to rant. That happened with the cancer. Sometimes I'll just get so angry with God. I get so angry with anybody who told me, oh no, it is well. It is not well in this moment. So let me go through. If I have to cry, leave me to cry. If I want to scream, let me scream. All you have to do is just support me and be there for me. If you don't have anything to say, or if you think you're going to say something wrong, just be there. Sometimes your silence is all a person needs. That's all that they need. And so I know in the African context, we understand support differently. You know what I mean? But once somebody has gone through that, then they will understand what it is. So I'm very careful, even when somebody gets a cancer diagnosis and, oh no, you're going to be fine. Just pray to God. You think I don't believe in God? I do. But in that moment, Don't tell me it's going to be okay if you yourself don't know that it's going to be okay. And especially if you can't tell me how it is going to be okay. So the best is just say, you know what, Karen, I'll hold your hand, I'll walk with you, and we'll see this through together, wherever it takes us. For me, that's the best kind of support.
Oh, it's a lot. It's a lot, but hearing you say that has just sent a whole wave of emotions. Even just dealing with my own. So I recently, is it recent? I lost my brother last June, 28th June. A year before that, exactly, I lost my sister who raised me as her own. And I was literally my sister's first child. And then you have to be strong. Lucky for me, her children were even stronger than I was, I feel. There was that support, but there's always that thing. Kolako in Lunda, say Kosa. Kolako. Eh? Your children, because now I am deputy mommy. I am now the mommy. Because now bakupiana. Be strong for your friends. It's a very tough one. And I remember looking at my sister's body in the coffin in church. And life has a way of, I don't know if it's humbling or just making you grow when you're not ready. You go to the funeral house, you pick up the body, you look at her, make sure she's fine. I broke down. My mom, my aunt's mom, just patted me on the back, says, no, she's at peace. And because we knew what my sister had gone through, she had gone through cancer. There was all this nursing and looking at that in that moment, I wasn't sad. I was sad, but looking at her, the emotion was, she's at peace. Because we all knew how hard it had been for her. And to this day, I say my sister gave up because literally the night she died, she held my hand, she held her daughter's hand and said, I want to say bye. And my aunt was by the bedside, says, bye, where are you going? Like, trying to, where quiz? And then she just says, in London, you know? And I was driving home, all these thoughts were going around. I was saying, oh, tomorrow I'm going to work from the hospital because I was writing exams the following week. And while I'm driving home, my kids are in the back of the car because I was doing the school run. This was like past 21. I went with the kids to the hospital. And this goes to the caregiving aspect. You're taking care of a patient, you have to still be mommy. And all these things are, it's really a difficult situation to be in as a woman. And Dr. Karen, Dr. Kunda, you see, it was going to happen. Dr. Kunda, what role does family play in a woman's recovery process during serious health challenges? Can you provide examples of what you would term as a support system that would work and help mental wellness? Because Karen is speaking about, and when she was speaking, I could even imagine, because she was saying, I was not the Karen that you know. Now, the Karen we know is this bubbly, vibrant, happy person. And then you don't know what she's going through because you said only your inner circle knew. And probably I'm out there saying, pena, pena. What is wrong with her? Because you don't know what she's dealing with. So how do we get women going through? Is it a loss? Is it a diagnosis around mental wellness so that they can cope? It's not going to be okay, but how can we handle this difficult situation such that it doesn't take its toll, even though granted it will happen?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think I was very touched by the story you just shared about how someone interrupted you in the middle of grieving, and this is something that I've heard quite a lot actually, and experienced, of course, myself. Because I think as a society, it goes to show how uncomfortable we are with our emotions. That we are so uncomfortable that we can't allow ourselves to feel. So how can I then allow the next person to feel? It's easier to just say, no, just shove it down. Don't display all of this emotion. It's they feel like they're doing the right thing, but actually they're only that way with you because that's how they are with themselves. And I think for us to be truly supportive, as a society, we first have to be self-aware. We have to have these conversations about emotions openly. I think in, typical African households, it's difficult. Mental health is not considered to be a thing. A lot of the time, even when you are sick, people don't believe you unless you are in agonizing pain, you know. Yes. So how then would they believe you when they say, no, I'm not feeling well because I'm feeling sad today? That's not a thing. It's no, it's not a disease. Yeah, get up and go to work, go to school. So it starts with just breaking the stigma, destigmatizing mental health, making it important to say, let's feel openly. It's okay. Being really comfortable with ourselves. And from a medical point of view, of course, when it comes to tackling a big diagnosis, there have been numerous studies which have been done which show that women who are getting family support do better. Like statistics actually show that one study done patients who had cardiac events, so that's like heart attacks and cardiac disease, they found that the ones who had family support did significantly better than the ones who didn't when it comes to rehabilitation. Interestingly, they also found that the ones who identified as primary caregivers, meaning the woman is saying, I'm the one who's taking care of everyone in the household, did not do as well as the ones who were not primary caregivers. So, it's what you said, right? So you'll be tackling a diagnosis, but you're still worried about everyone else. How is this person doing? And that actually affects your rehabilitation, how well you actually do with your health. So I think those are just some of the things that we need to keep in mind.
Karen, how did you cope? What coping mechanisms, if any, did you adopt if you did cope? You spoke about your best friend coming from the copper belt. So in the moments when she wasn't there, how were you coping? I know that out of this whole unfortunate scenario, something that you're passionate about, the advocacy work that you're doing, an amazing work, was birthed. But how did you get to even think of something like that?
Usually, when you are faced with something like that, I think the first thing that kicks in is your defense mechanism, even without realizing it. You actually go into that before you even start to think of how am I going to cope or how am I going to go through this. Like she said, you start thinking of others. I started thinking of my children. I'm like, so who's going to look after my babies if I go? I even watched my funeral procession. I even saw who would come, who wouldn't. It's that crazy, but that's what happens. You literally see your life just whiz past, you know? So I started thinking about my family. Remember at the funeral, I was like the first child. So I'm like the mother now. And everybody now, my brothers call me mommy. You know what I mean? And so I'm thinking, what are these boys going to do? And because I knew the relationship that we all had with mom, I think she had a special relationship with each one of us. But they all say that I was the most spoiled because I was her first child. And so I started thinking, have I done enough? Mom has been gone for a year. Have I done enough for these boys? If I leave, are they going to be able to cope? You know what I mean? And then my children, they're used to a certain kind of life. Of course, they'll be looked after, but will they get the same kind of love? So you start thinking of others before you start thinking about yourself. And I think for me, that's what helped me cope, was thinking about these kids. And now I had to fight so that I don't leave them alone. But other than that, it was work. Like I said, I never stopped working. I was on radio every Sunday, I think except the last Sunday because the chemo knocked me out. My body finally gave up because I had 23 sessions of radiation. I had 5 sessions of chemo, and that was every week. And the radiation was Monday to Friday. For like 6 weeks. The machine broke down once. So, and then I had brachytherapy. You probably would know brachytherapy. And I think in the last week, my body just got tired. It just gave us, you know what, Karen, yeah, get off your heels and just, sit down. But in the background, I was busy attending meetings for Zambia Fashion Week. And the minute I remember finishing, I was in hospital for the last week because the brachytherapy really just messed me up. I had a very bad UTI. So I was in hospital for about 5 days. And the Fashion Week was like 2 2 weeks away. So I literally got out of hospital on a Friday. Saturday, I was at Mulungushi. My doctor, Dr. Kapamba, had to sit backstage with me to help me, Dr. Sharon. Karen, get off your heels. Sit down. You're back. Because she knew, you know what I mean? And I would sit down and just think things are not happening because I wanted to be, hey, you're next. So that was a way of coping for me.
So you kept yourself busy.
Absolutely. That was a way of coping. And at that point, like I said, very few people knew what was happening. And that was in October now. November, December, I think for me, I always say I was very lucky because from point of diagnosis to start of treatment was literally 3 weeks. And women now have to wait 3 years to get onto treatment. So I didn't get that opportunity to sit at home and say, oh no, I have cancer. Like everything was happening, so it was like an out of body experience. By the time I realized I had cancer, I was done. I remember being invited to speak at the UN General Assembly, September, just after I finished my treatment. My doctor says, Karen, you have to go to the UN. They want a survivor to speak. And I looked at her, I said, no. What am I going to speak about? She said, your journey. I said, what journey? Your cancer journey. I said, I've not had any journey. And that is how I turned down the opportunity. And I even told her, I said, if I'm going to go, I'm supposed to go. Trust me, I will go. But right now, I don't even know what happened to me. So I think that keeping busy was a way of me coping. And I only started the advocacy through Facebook in February of 2020. And then that's when my life just turned around. Like I didn't even know what advocacy was really, because I was just thinking, I'm going to start a Facebook page and for me to talk about this journey, because I think I realized that talking about it was sort of helping. And even now I realize that the more I talk about it, I think the more healing I get.
You're still healing.
You know what I mean? And so I started because I would have conversations with this one, with my friends, took all my friends for screening. And then I thought to myself, I could actually speak to more people. So I started the Facebook page, which blew up in my face because within a month, I had over 100,000 women on that page, very active. And everybody was going for screening for the first time in the country. They recorded more women screening in the first quarter than they would in the whole year. And so everything was happening so fast, I didn't really get that chance to just sit back and say, oh, I had cancer, I was going to die, things like that. So I think for me, throwing myself in work made me cope. And just keeping busy. Because like I said, there was no support group. There was no survivor for me to go and talk to. So how was your journey? What did you do? How did you cope? There was nobody, absolutely.
Dr. Kunda, what 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 would you say to somebody going through an experience like Karen in terms of coping? So Karen's coping mechanism was keeping herself busy, going into work. I'm not a medical specialist. Now I'm just using logic. I don't even know if it's making sense. But I feel like because she deep dived into work, she didn't have time to grieve or really assimilate the fact that she was facing this disease. Because from what you've said, by the time you were done, this is not like, oh, okay, here we are. Like, what would you say? And in as much as we're looking at her specific cases, other women dealing with other diseases, other terminal illnesses, or maybe they're caregiving. It could be a husband. I know friends who are dealing with a husband who may have had surgery or some sort, or they have a terminal illness and they're the primary caregiver. How are they dealing with this person that they're having to take care of? And a certain aspect of their life suffers and the like. And Karen, for the longest time, has been self employed. I'm trying to picture that happening to somebody who has a day job. You've got meetings, you've got teams that you're supervising, you've got the stakeholders that you have to report to, and you are dealing with what she had to deal with. What's your advice to anybody that might be going through that in terms of how do we cope and what practical ways can we cope with something like is there even does coping even exist? Maybe that's what I should be asking. Is it even possible to cope? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Ah,
So, I mean, of course, it's going to differ from person to person. And what worked for Karen, of course, is work. I think the important thing is routine. Having some sort of routine, and more than that, something that genuinely brings you joy. I can tell, of course, that Karen loves her work. She genuinely enjoys it, and so focusing on that obviously was the easiest thing in the moment, probably, right? To do is to focus on work. For someone else, for instance, for me, it's working out. I love to exercise. I love to move my body. And even on days when, there are those days where you think about how many things you have to do today and you just genuinely want to cry because there's just 1,000 things to do. It's just like this schedule is not even humanly possible. But if I start my day with a walk, I start my day with a run, I know we're good. As long as for that 1 hour, all I'm doing is running. I'm not thinking about the kids. They're all set. You leave them home. They even know this hour is for mommy. And mommy is just doing mommy right now. And that's the one thing that gives me energy. It gives me joy, and if I can start my day like that, I know we'll be fine. And I think that's something that I would encourage other women to do as well. It doesn't have to be exercise. It would be great if it's something healthy, some sort of self-care practice that just it brings you joy. And with exercise, of course, scientifically, your body's releasing endorphins. So you're definitely going to feel better after. So it's just being very deliberate about working in some sort of self-care, just that time when you can get your mind off the problems. If it means throwing yourself into work, then, do that. But of course, in the healthiest way possible. So I think it's self-care. And self-care, again, because a lot of the time when we're thinking about self-care, we're thinking about going to an expensive spa, getting all these fancy massages, and you may not have the budget for that, right? It doesn't have to be. A walk in nature, meditation, spiritual practices as well. If you're someone who, you're a Christian, you go to church, and that's your source of comfort, then throw yourself into that. Yeah.
Yeah. And just to add on to what she has said, we call it self-care. I call it self-preservation. And I always say that we women are so many things to different people, such that we forget ourselves. You're a husband, you're a wife, you're a mother, you're a sister, you're a boss. You're everything, and everybody's coming to you. They want a piece of you, and in that we sort of tend to forget who we are, and we forget about ourselves, and forget to look out for ourselves. Even when you're caregiving, there are some women who will be caring for a husband. The sister will come and say, "Kwa Phiri sheko, hawe ngababu kabasange nebo ndiku bedside." Hello, you know what I mean? You need to go and recharge whatever it is you do. I do that a lot. I really just step out. I step away from being a wife. I step away from being a mother. And I'll just tell them, guys, I've taken so many solo holidays when I just feel like I need to get out of that space. Because if I want to do it at home, this one will come and say, "Oh, madam, can you bunch? Oh, madam, oh, mommy, I want. Oh, honey, can you?" I literally just, you know what? My passport, I'm gone. If I'm going to find you guys alive, that's it. We'll do this again. As long as you don't die when I'm not there, we're going to do this again. But I have to think about me. Because how am I going to give you something that I don't have? And we keep giving, we keep giving, we keep giving. We don't think about replenishing. Imagine, it's like when you're retching, like when you're very sick and you're throwing up. There comes a point when you've thrown up everything inside you, but you still want to throw up. And that's painful. So you need to replenish, and we need to just take a moment to just step back. No matter how bad things are going on, and this I'm speaking from experience. No matter, going through a cancer diagnosis is not child's play. And so in that moment, you just want to get better, and you start forcing your body to get better. Like, just slow down. Just trust the process and let your body go through the process. Let your mind go through that process. Don't rush it. If you're going to grieve for your mother for 10 years, so be it. That is your process. Because when you are done that grieving process, you'll be a perfect human being, or you'll be a good human, maybe not perfect, but you'll be as good as new. So even when you're caregiving, you need to find a coping mechanism. Do something. Go out with your friends, even if it's just for an hour or two. Go and laugh. Like she says, doesn't have to be expensive. Take a walk, read a book, just do something. Just step out of being that caregiver, because you know what? People will always talk. And that's what we worry about. If I leave my husband to bedside, they'll say, oh no, she does. When he dies, she wasn't even there when he died. How was I going to know he was going to die at 1306? I stepped out just to get a glass of water and the guy has died. Suddenly I'm the bad person. I think we need to be allowed as women to just find ourselves. You lose your spark, it's difficult to regain it because everybody's expecting you to be this perfect mom, perfect wife. Because you know what? I'll give you an example. Or I'll just give you a scenario. You die, hypothetically speaking. We've all been to funerals where friends have lost husbands. Have you seen the woman throwing herself in the coffin, or the children saying, I want to die with my mother? Do you know what happens? After 2-3 weeks, they move on with their life. Husband marries. You are there dead because you wanted to take care of them and not take care of you. Life will go on with or without you.
Just to re-echo what Karen has just said, which is just to say that we need to move towards wellness. So there's health and there's wellness, right? So when we're talking about health, we're talking about the mental, physical, social well-being. WHO says, and not just the absence of disease, right? But when we're talking about wellness, these are now activities which promote good health, which promote the maintenance of good health as well. So even things like screening go into that. How are you taking care of yourself before you even get sick? Like, let's just, this is 2025, right? So, of course, here in the third world, we're still dealing with a lot of infectious disease, but we need to also start thinking about how can we even prevent, ourselves from getting sick, because NCDs are coming up, like non-communicable diseases. That's your hypertension, your diabetes, and a lot of cancers that are non-communicable are also on the rise as well. And so if these things are increasing and we still have HIV, we still have TB and STIs, imagine where we'll be if we don't take action, if we're not literally taking care of our bodies. So let's move into wellness. How are we eating? How are we moving our bodies well? Both of which can help us, decrease the incidence of so many of these, even cancers, if we're taking good care of our bodies. And then health-seeking behaviors, which is something that Karen mentioned. Go and get yourself checked. Something shouldn't hurt before you get a physical. Before you do your cervical cancer screening, you check your HIV status, and things like that. So it's really, let's take better care of ourselves. You can't pour from an empty cup. Let's give to ourselves before we can give to others, especially as women.
Thank you very much. This has been a wonderful session. So much learning. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I feel like I could be hugging you right here.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being a part of it. I love your last words. You can't pour from an empty cup. And this is what these conversations are for us. We're hoping that our cups filled with this information that we have will be able to pour into other women, inspire them as they go along their journeys, empower them with information, and see how we can connect. I'm connecting with you. There's a lady out there who's seen something, and maybe another person going through something. Through Karen, maybe Karen's experience is going to help them get through their own journey. And no journey is the same, as you said. Everyone has their own journey, but what we can do is learn what has helped one person and see if we can incorporate it. Thank you so much, ladies. And to everybody out there watching and listening, thank you so much for joining us. This has been the W conversation around navigating loss and managing our health and just building resilience. Thank you so much. If you'd like more information about the W initiative, you can call 202 or email zambiainfo@accessbankplc.